The bank manager set the survey down on the hood of his black SUV and smiled the way a man smiles when he already knows how the afternoon will end. "Mr. Coleman, the silo and everything within 40 feet of it belongs to First Meridian as of Tuesday. You have until then to remove your equipment." He said it loud enough that the two construction foremen behind him heard every word. One of them laughed. The other looked at the ground. Earl Coleman did not answer. He was 73 years old, standing in a field he had walked every morning for 46 years, and he was looking past the manager toward the silo itself, the gray concrete column his father had poured in 1955, the year Earl turned 7. Behind that silo, 12 inches under the dirt at the base of the north footing, was a tin bread box his father had buried the same week the concrete cured. Earl had not opened it in 41 years. He had not needed to. "Tuesday," the manager repeated, because Earl had not spoken. Earl nodded once. "I heard you." Then he turned and walked back toward the house, past the oak tree his mother had planted, past the creek that ran low in August and high every March, and he did not look back at the manager or the foreman or the silo. He walked the way a man walks when he has already decided something and sees no reason to announce it. His name was Earl Robert Coleman. He had been born in Greene County, Iowa in 1953, and he had lived on the same 312 acres his entire life except for 2 years in Vietnam between 1971 and 1973. His father, Robert Coleman Sr., had bought the land in pieces between 1948 and 1956, paying a man named Henrik Voss in cash and handshakes and one signed contract for the final and largest parcel, the 80 acres that contained the silo and the creek and the back pasture. Robert Sr. had built the silo himself with 2 cousins and a borrowed mixer in the spring of 1955. He had been particular about that silo. He had drawn its placement on graph paper and walked the foundation line 3 times before they poured. Earl had taken over the farm in 1984 when his father's heart gave out in the middle of a conversation about seed corn. His mother had lived another 19 years in the farmhouse, and his wife Margaret had moved in with them the year they married, 1979, and stayed until the cancer took her in November of 2019. Margaret had kept the books. Margaret had labeled every folder, dated every receipt, and once a year on the first Saturday in February, she had carried the whole previous year's records up to the attic in a metal file box and shelved it next to the others. There were 41 of those boxes now. Earl had not touched them since the funeral. He had raised 2 children on the land. His son David was an electrician in Des Moines. His daughter Caroline taught 5th grade in Cedar Rapids and called every Sunday at 6. Both of them had asked him, in the months after Margaret died, whether he wanted to sell some of the back acreage and move into town. He had told them no the same way both times. "Your mother is buried under the oak. I'm not leaving her alone out here." The land had cost him things. A barn fire in 1991 that took 2 horses and most of a winter's hay. A hailstorm in 2003 that flattened the corn 3 weeks before harvest. A bad knee from a tractor rollover in 2007 that he never quite walked off. 3 Christmases missed because a sow was farrowing or a pipe had burst or the diesel had gelled at 4 in the morning. He had paid the mortgage off in 2002 and the small operating loan against the back 80 in 2014, and he had kept every receipt because Margaret had told him to, and Margaret had been right about most things. The letter from First Meridian Bank had arrived on a Thursday in September. It was 3 pages long. It explained that the bank had recently completed a routine title audit of agricultural properties in Greene County and had determined that an 80-acre parcel currently being farmed by Earl Coleman was in fact owned by First Meridian Bank as the result of an unrecorded transfer dating to 1962. The letter included a survey, a photocopy of a deed Earl had never seen, and a notice that the bank intended to begin construction of a regional grain storage facility on the site beginning Tuesday, October 14th, with a 40-foot perimeter cleared around the existing silo for staging. The man who signed the letter was Garrett Whitfield, Vice President of Asset Recovery, First Meridian Bank, age 34, MBA from the University of Chicago. According to the bank's internal newsletter, which Earl's daughter found online and printed out, Whitfield had joined First Meridian's Asset Recovery Division in 2022 and had been promoted twice in 18 months for his work on what the newsletter called legacy parcel reclamation. Whitfield's quarterly bonus was tied to the assessed value of acreage recovered through title research. In the previous fiscal year, he had recovered, by the bank's measure, 407 acres across 3 counties. Earl's 80 acres would have been the largest single recovery of the current year. Whitfield, Earl would later learn, had spent 14 minutes on his case before signing the letter. He had done this to 7 other farmers in the past 2 years. 5 had paid the bank to settle. 1 had sold the disputed parcel back to the bank for 19 cents on the dollar. 1 had died during the dispute, and his widow had signed everything Whitfield put in front of her. None of them had gone to court. The bank's calculation, written in a memo Earl's lawyer would eventually obtain, was that elderly farmers with disputed deeds settled at a rate of 91% within 60 days when presented with a survey and a deadline. Earl drove to town the morning after Whitfield's visit. He wore the brown jacket Margaret had bought him in 2011 and the boots he had polished the night before. He parked outside a small office on Main Street with a hand-painted sign that read, "Holloway Law," and walked in without an appointment. Sarah Holloway was 41 years old and had moved back to Greene County 4 years earlier to take over her father's practice. She had 3 other clients that morning, and she made Earl wait 20 minutes. And when he sat down across from her and slid the letter across the desk, she read it once and then read it again, slower. "Mr. Coleman, I have to be honest with you. This deed they're attaching looks valid on its face. If they recorded it in 1962 and your father never contested it, the bank's claim has weight. I can fight it, but I'd be fighting uphill, and I don't want to take your money if there's nothing to fight with." Earl listened. When she was done, he said, "My father buried something behind the silo in 1955. I'd like you to come look at it with me before you decide what's uphill." Sarah Holloway looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her keys. They drove out to the farm together that afternoon. Earl walked her past the oak tree and past Margaret's grave under it, and out across the back pasture to the silo. He had brought a shovel from the barn. He measured 12 paces from the north footing the way his father had measured them in 1955, and he marked the spot with the heel of his boot, and he began to dig. Sarah stood with her hands in her coat pockets and said nothing. The October air was cold, and the ground gave easily for the first 6 inches and then harder. Earl was 73, and his knee was bad, and he stopped twice to breathe, but he did not let her take the shovel. At 14 inches, the blade hit metal. He cleared the dirt away with his hands. The bread box was rusted along the edges, but the lid still fit tight. He worked it free of the soil and lifted it out and set it on the grass and looked at it for a long time before he opened it. Inside were 4 items wrapped in oilcloth. A photograph of Earl's father standing in front of the half-finished silo with 2 cousins, dated April 1955 in pencil on the back. A receipt from Greene County Concrete and Aggregate for the silo materials, also dated 1955. A handwritten letter from Robert Coleman Sr. to whoever might find the box, addressed simply to "my son" or "his son," explaining what was in the box and why he had buried it. And a single folded document, 4 pages, stapled at the corner, with a notary's seal on the last page and the signatures of Robert Coleman Sr. and Henrik Voss and 2 witnesses, dated June 18, 1955. It was the original deed, the recorded, notarized, witnessed transfer of all 80 acres from Henrik Voss to Robert Coleman Sr. for the sum of $14,400, paid in full. 7 years before the unrecorded transfer, the bank claimed had given the land to a holding company that had eventually become a predecessor to First Meridian. Sarah Holloway read the document twice. Then she read Robert Sr.'s letter. Then she sat down on the grass next to the bread box and put her face in her hands for a moment, and when she looked up, she was almost smiling. "Mr. Coleman, your father knew." "He knew what?" "He knew this would happen someday. Not this exact bank, but somebody. He knew the deed he recorded at the courthouse might disappear or be challenged, so he buried a notarized original where only family would find it. He buried it at the base of the silo, so the silo itself was the marker. Mr. Coleman, your father was the smartest man I've never met." Earl looked at the photograph in his hand. His father had been 44 years old in 1955. He had a hat in his hand and a half-built silo behind him, and he was not smiling, because he had not been a man who smiled for cameras. "He told my mother once," Earl said, "that paper at the courthouse was only as safe as the courthouse. I didn't know what he meant." "You do now." She filed the response on a Monday. The bank's legal team called her office on Wednesday morning at 9:11 a.m. The speed told her everything she needed to know. By Friday, a courier delivered a formal withdrawal of First Meridian's claim, signed not by Garrett Whitfield, but by the bank's general counsel. The withdrawal acknowledged the 1955 deed, acknowledged that the bank's 1962 transfer had been based on a clerical fabrication by a holding company long since dissolved, and offered no apology and no explanation. Sarah Holloway was not satisfied. She filed a counterclaim the following Monday for damages, the cost of the survey Earl had paid for in 1998 to settle a fence dispute, the value of the crops the bank had threatened to disrupt, the emotional distress of a 73-year-old widower facing the loss of his land, and the pattern of conduct evidenced by the 7 other farmers Whitfield had pressured. She subpoenaed the internal bank memo on settlement rates. She subpoenaed Whitfield's bonus structure. She subpoenaed his 14-minute review of Earl's case. The mediation was held in a conference room at the Federal Building in Des Moines on the second Tuesday of January. The room was small and the walls were wood-paneled, and there was an American flag in the corner. The bank's 3 lawyers arrived first, in pressed suits with matching leather folders. Garrett Whitfield was with them. He did not look at Earl when Earl walked in alone, with Sarah Holloway 1 step behind him. The mediator was a retired federal judge named Howard Linden, 68 years old, 26 years on the bench before retirement. He had read everything the night before. He sat down and asked the bank's lead counsel to state the bank's position. The lead counsel spoke for 19 minutes about regrettable administrative oversight and good faith reliance on existing records. When he was done, Linden turned to Sarah Holloway. "Counselor." Sarah set the 1955 deed on the table. She set the photograph next to it. She set Robert Coleman Sr.'s letter next to that. She set the internal bank memo on settlement rates next to that. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "Mr. Coleman's father buried this deed in 1955 because he understood, even then, that men like Mr. Whitfield would eventually come for the land. Mr. Coleman is not interested in a settlement that compensates him for a wrong. He is interested in a settlement that ensures Mr. Whitfield does not do this to anyone else." Linden read the deed in silence. Then he read the letter. The room waited. No one spoke. He set the documents down and looked at the bank's lead counsel. "Mr. Halverson, I have one question. How many other farmers in Greene County and the surrounding 3 counties have received letters from Mr. Whitfield's division in the past 24 months? The lead counsel looked at his folder. He looked at Whitfield. He looked back at the judge. "I would need to consult with my client, Your Honor." "You have an hour." When they reconvened, the bank's final terms were entirely Earl's terms. Damages of $340,000 paid to Earl Coleman directly. A formal letter of withdrawal sent to each of the 7 other farmers Whitfield had pressured, with full restoration of any acreage transferred under duress, at the bank's expense. The dissolution of the Asset Recovery Division as a profit-bearing unit. The termination of Garrett Whitfield's employment effective immediately. And a clause Sarah had drafted herself. A permanent prohibition on First Meridian Bank pursuing any title claim in Greene County based on records older than 1980 without independent court review. Whitfield signed the termination acknowledgement in the same room. He did not look at Earl. He left through a side door. Earl drove home alone that afternoon, the same truck he had driven for 19 years. He took the long way, past the cemetery on County Road 14, where his father was buried, and past the field where his father had taught him to drive a tractor when he was 8 years old. He did not stop at either place. He drove home, parked the truck by the barn, and walked out across the back pasture in the long January light to the silo. The hole he had dug in October was still there, half filled with leaves. The bread box was on his kitchen counter now, but he had brought the original deed back with him, folded the way his father had folded it, wrapped in the same oilcloth. He knelt at the base of the north footing, and he placed the deed in the hole, and he covered it with dirt and leaves the way it had been covered for 68 years before he had touched it. He stood up slowly. His knee complained. He looked at the silo for a long time. You were right, Dad. He said it out loud, to no one, in a field where no one could hear him. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, past the creek and past the oak tree, and past the small, flat stone under it where Margaret was buried. And he did not stop walking until he reached the porch. That night he called his daughter Caroline at 6 o'clock the way he did every Sunday, except it was a Tuesday, and when she picked up he could hear her laugh on the other end of the line before he had said anything at all. She had been laughing at something one of her students had said. He listened to her laugh for a moment before he spoke. It was an ordinary sound on an ordinary evening, and after 41 years of trusting a buried box, and 46 years of walking the same field every morning, and 3 months of fighting a bank that had given itself the right to take what was not its own, Earl Coleman thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world. The land gave back exactly what you put into it. Robert Coleman Sr. had believed that. He had buried a deed under a silo he poured with his own hands because he understood that the law was only as strong as the paper that proved it, and the paper was only as safe as the man who hid it well. Earl had inherited the land and the silo and the bread box and the patience that came with all three. Some inheritances are written into wills. The best ones are buried in the ground and waited for. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Next time, we're telling the story of a 71-year-old widow in Tennessee who received a foreclosure notice on a house her husband had paid off in 1987, and the cedar chest in her bedroom that held a single canceled check her husband had carried home the day he made the final payment. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll see you there. Paste your script.